Okay, so we are working to finish up our poster design, and now we're just adding some special effects. So I have brought in my vector elements, my spot illustration, my text, and then I started looking at actual Pokemon cards, and I noticed that they're printed with a noticeable Gaussian rose pattern. This is called a half drop color separation 4-color offset printing from a lithography press, from a professional press. So looking close at that, I can see those dots, and I can actually imitate that in Photoshop if I want to. So I'm going to show you that. Not that that's always the best idea. I'm also noticing, and this is something I didn't notice quite before, that there is a drop shadow underneath these little crescent O's, so that those feel like they're popping out instead of being sunk in. And I don't have that on my crescent O's. And that's not part of my vector design, is either black and white or in color. So these are little things I can fix. I'm going to give you a little bit more background on the color separations, but first let me just show you how I can fix something just on the poster design, even though it's a vector smart layer. This would be like a color hold to it, something I do over the top of it. So if I go to my colored vector text and I find my smart layer here, because it's a vector, it's going to be perfectly clean no matter what resolution I make it in Photoshop. And it won't allow me to do things like paint on it or add a drop shadow without rasterizing it. I don't want to rasterize it. I want to keep it as a vector. But I can make selections from it, like we learned in digital coloring. So if I put contiguous on, I'll use the default tolerance of 32 on the magic wand, and I select both of these blue crescents. Just hold down Shift and select them both, and then duplicate them, Command J. It will automatically rasterize what I've selected and copy them onto a new layer. And that matches the resolution of whatever this poster is. So within the poster file, this is a fine method. Then I can double click on those, and I can give them an individual drop shadow. And it looks like it's a pretty straightforward drop shadow. That's a little bit darker than 8%. But it's subtle, a little bit sharper, and maybe not quite as deep. Yeah, it's very, very light. So let me make it a slightly grayer color. Something like that. And then I can also sharpen it up by increasing its distance but decreasing its size. So something like that, thin it out, very, very subtle. So in finishing it up, and I like that, in finishing it up, it's all about little details like that. It really is. The other detail I'm noticing in my vector text, because sometimes, especially when we do coloring with layer styles in Photoshop, little things can happen. So notice that my overlay of color is affecting it, affecting my sharp edges of my vector line work for this tagline. So let me turn them off and on and see what happens. So it's mostly the gradient and the color overlay that are causing that. And so if I got rid of those, it looks a lot sharper. It just doesn't have that kind of dull color. And so you might make little decisions like that. I might also decide to thin the stroke a little bit. Maybe go from 8 to 7. And just see the difference. Just very subtle to kind of tighten it up. Okay, other things I might think about. Basically, how well does the character or the spot illustration work against the background. So I have this very textured overlaid background. I've got textured paper there. I've got the sunburst. I've got the spirals. I've even got a little bit of the halftone dots from this cloud I brought in to kind of mimic the swirl behind the Pokeball. But then I was looking at other Pokemon cards, especially the ones in Japan, and they go even crazier with the swirl and more colors. So often we tend to over-design things. And honestly, I believe that this cloud is maybe a little over-designed that I got from the NASA pictures. And it might be cleaner without it. But then I'm looking and I think, well, this gradation, it's a very even background. And that, when I squint, kind of puts too much weight at the top. You know, the top really contrasts, but the bottom half of this, the character doesn't contrast very well with the background. So what I might do instead is simply do a gradation. And so I found this gradation. Let me show it to you. I found this just very subtle gradation. And I could also just paint one in, you know, that's warm colors. I could take the opacity down. Yeah, but that kind of takes out the blueness of it that I like. So instead, I try different blending modes and we put it to soft light. And I like how that transitions it just really, it desaturates the blue of the background a little bit, helps this pop out, but especially helps the bottom pop out because it goes warmer and brighter at the bottom of my character. So I like that. Now, is there anything else I can do to improve this? Well, I think that's pretty strong. I'm going to save that as my poster. But I haven't done that one trick that I did at the very end of the last demo. I'd started the action, but you hadn't seen how it worked out. And I want you to be able to play with it and decide if you want to bring it in or not. And that's called CMYK dot separation, color separation. So to show you that, I prepared a few images in my own personal PhotoBucket account. Now this one will probably have ads and stuff, so I apologize. So I can only afford one PhotoBucket membership per year, and that's going to be for our class. But it has some nice examples of color separation in professional practice and how designers like to reference it. Even though it's a very old print technology, with digital design we can control it instead of just letting it be an artifact of the printing process. So, called color separation, or CMYK SEP for short. This is what digital designers do with it. So it's based on the idea that whenever we print a full resolution rendering in color, that rendering is still created with solid 100% opaque inks. And those inks, in order to mix the colors, have to offset from each other, like dot printing, like in our printers. So you'll see the cyan, the magenta, the colors have to overlap each other in order to get this kind of mix and this illusion of different tones. Of course, the smaller the dots are, the less noticeable it is. So this is some of my work, just playing with simple photographic images and then separating them out in dots and then offsetting the layers a little bit. And this is to play with 3D glasses and to create a 3D illusion by separating out the cyan and the magenta channels. This is up close. I did it with Texas as steak and then California as veggies. And it makes it look like kind of old printing. You can also have fun with kind of making the different ink layers jitter on each other and misalign. Now, my first experience with this was making silkscreen prints. And in order to make silkscreen prints, you have to separate out each of these dot matrices on separate screens. And then you have to print, for a full color image, a minimum of 4 screens onto the same piece of paper. And so what happens is little things get offset. Now, where we see this very easily is when things are printed on bad paper. So old comics or newspaper comics, you can see the dots in the printing because these are only printed at 150 dots per inch. And those dots can only mix so much at 150 dots per inch. So your color range is pretty limited. It actually mimics the swatch range that Photoshop gives you now as the default. So when we zoom in on it, you'll see little dot patterns like that. Now, digital illustrators know that this is basically a photographic process, separating out these colors. And you can do it with or without turning them into dot screens. So this is a designer just playing with separating out the cyan and magenta channels on just a photograph and offsetting them to create something a little more interesting. And it would probably look kind of cool through 3D glasses as well, a little separated from its background. This, I think, was a brilliant design, and it's done as just a 2-color offset job with the separation into dots and just overlapped on each other so you can see the skull if you want to, or you can see the horse's head if you want to. And then in 3D glasses, if you blink, you would see one or the other, or I guess wink, because you could block out the cyan in one and you could block out the red in the other. So this has been used in lots of creative ways with design. And this is the basic idea, to offset. You take your basic inks, and where they overlap, you'll get, even though they're 100% inks, the inks themselves on the paper are somewhat transparent, around 70% transparent, so that they do create, when they overlap, new tones. Lots of examples. There's lots of demos. This is using the halftone filter within Photoshop, which just kind of plays with it as a stylistic flourish. But to do it, to really make something print ready, you have to know the exact dot angles so that you can get these exact roses when the colors mix. So that's what I'm going to show you. And these are the exact angles. And this is something I want you to know for your final. Black is always at a 45-degree angle. So that's a classic, what's called half-drop pattern, like bricks in a wall. That you have a line, and then you have the line underneath is just offset by 1/2, so that the angle going through it is 45 degrees. You want to surround black. You don't want to have anything too close to black since the black ink sits on top. So you go 30 degrees on either side before you get to the next dot angle. So 30 degrees from black is magenta at 75 degrees. 30 degrees from black on the other side is yellow, which can also be expressed as 90 degrees. And since a 90-degree dot angle is the most boring, it's all horizontals and verticals, you want that to be yellow because yellow is the least noticeable. And then 15 degrees off of yellow is the cyan. Now the reason you can't go 30 degrees off of the yellow is because you only have 90 degrees to work with, right? So this could be expressed as 15 degrees or as 105 degrees or as negative 5 or something. You'll see it in different ways. But basically, the colors are all 15 apart from each other, and they're all 30 degrees apart from black. All right. And the idea is when they mix, when they're all layered on top of each other, you get, with cyan, magenta, and yellow inks, you get what's called a 100% black. But that's a muddy brown. And so on top of that, you print your extra black layer. And that's how it works. So here are the angles again. Black 45 degrees, magenta 75, cyan 15 degrees or 115 degrees, and yellow is 0. Because remember, there's a big difference between the pixels on your screen and the dots that those pixels are actually printed with. So to make something print ready for professional publication, you need to control these dots, or at least know what's going to happen. So on and on and on. And once you have control of them, you can play some nice games with them. So I showed you how to use the halftone filter, which kind of works somewhat unpredictably. It's a stylistic filter, But now I'm going